Welcome. You're listening to Island Life with myself, David Kinley, a series of programmes entitled New World, Old Ways, where we discuss the history, culture, folklore, superstitions and music of the Manx emigres to the New World, the USA, and in particular, the Appalachian Mountains. In today's episode, I talk to Fenella Bazin about the Manx and their music. So predominantly for our Manx emigre, we're looking at the 18th and 19th century and what their experience of music and events would have been. But let's go back a little bit further. And for the first depiction, visual evidence of any instrument in the Isle of Man, we're going back to Viking times, aren't we?
We are indeed, yes. We're looking at one of the crosses, particularly in Kirkmichael, where there is a harp. Now, it's just a little harp, like a Celtic harp, and it's being played by what looks like a Valkyrie. But there's also a lure, which is the great horn, which was used to gather people together and to warn people about things happening.
Similar to a carnix?
Yes, very similar to that. So that's the earliest depiction, but where that image came from, whether it had come from off the island, I suspect so, because we've never really had harp music on the island until Charles God, of course, really woke up the potential harp population in the island. But when you think of it, we're surrounded by countries, nations which have harp music.
Indeed.
And we don't. We have fiddle music.
Predominantly fiddle music.
Predominantly fiddle music, right from the earliest mentions of it, 1600s. So that ties in very much with the Scandinavian tradition, because the Swedes, of course, and you were saying the Finns have got harps,
Indeed.
but the Norwegians didn't. They played fiddles. Things like the Hardanger fiddle, of course, which is famous. So we don't have the Hardanger fiddle, but I recently gave a fiddle that I had bought many years ago, made in Ramsey. I gave it to Culture Fan, and then they've got that for someone to play music on.
Sure.
Sure. So that's the harp and the violin tradition.
I believe one of the oldest examples of the fiddle instrument came from Denmark, from the island of Finn. And that's the oldest one in existence. And apparently from this musical family of these, they ended up becoming onto a neck of an instrument. Particularly the Danish and the North Germans brought this to America, and it became the Appalachian Mountain Dulcimer.
I didn't know that. Isn't it interesting how these traditions travel and how they're then adapted?
Absolutely, which of course they played with an African instrument which went to become called the banjo. So there we go. But back to the Isle of Man and the 18th and 1900s. What sort of music and events and church music? We have a very prolific back catalogue of music, don't we? We do seem to be quite music lovers. What do they brought with them over the Atlantic?
Well, when John Wesley came, he was absolutely startled to find that the singing here was as good as any in places like Bath. You know, who would have thought this in the Isle of Man, he said in tones. The Manx can sing, and they were singing in ways that he recognised. It wasn't like the Lewis Gaelic psalms, which were, if you've ever heard them, they're very drawn out, and each person sings dramatically in their own way. So it's quite a moving sound. But Hall Caine describes that as well in one of his books. He describes something like the Lewis Gaelic psalms I can't remember which of his books now it was, but he describes this sort of slow, drawn-out style. So whether that survived as well. But we had, to go back to your question really, in the early 1800s, we had a man coming over from the Whitehaven area to lead groups and to train choirs. And he spent a lot of time in Colby. And I don't know if you've come across the Colby notebooks.
No.
They're in the Manx Museum, and those were the first that I came across of the church music manuscript books. And Francis Rhodes, who did his doctorate, rather like me, late in life, He spent several years studying the Colby notebooks and came to the conclusion there were three different choirs. There was a very basic choir. There was one that was a little bit better, and then there was a specialist choir. And the sort of music they sang is not the sort of hymns that we would recognise now. It's generally known as West Gallery music. And we in the Isle of Man have one of the richest sources, richest varieties of West Gallery music. Hardy writes in his novels about the West Gallery music in Dorset. But it's very samey. There's no great variety. Go to Sheffield and you get this huge variety where people now sing in pubs because they were driven out of the chapels. And we have that tradition, just as they do in parts of Cornwall and Wales.
Amongst the fiddle playing and the choristers, let's say, what sort of events other than a church would we find a bit of a knees up going on? Sort of Eelverries, weddings,
the Eelverries
Saints' Days?
Saints' Days, possibly. I'm sure people sort of got together at the end of a holiday when they'd had a Saints' Day. And they'd perhaps had, market of some sort, or signing on new stuff for farms.
Yeah.
But we don't know what they sang, except there is a secular manuscript which Ian Radcliffe has done a lot of work on recently and published, which is called the Killia Flute Book, and that's based in Derby. It's also known as the Derby Flute Book sometimes. And that gives us an idea of what was being performed in the early part of the 1800s. We're now getting into the 18 rather than the 1700s. There's very little evidence about what was going on in the 1700s, except, written anecdotes. But here we've actually got a manuscript, and it's full of dances, marches, and it has 8 pieces which have got Manx titles. And the Manx titles, they're not folk tunes, they're classical tunes, and I'm just looking to see because I have the titles of some of them. And the Isle of Man March, the Derby March, the Waltz Douglas, the Maid of Belaf Mulla, Ramsey Grand March, the Waltz Ramsey, Isle of Man Quick Step.
It was all very regional. The dance sets, Cayleys, as we would know them now, would they be an event in those times?
Well, I wonder if the Derby book was something to do with the benevolent societies, because every parish had its own benevolent society. Andres, of course, still survived, right until, I don't know if it still survives now, it certainly survived until recent times, on Ascension Day, where there were games, and then there'd be marches, and there'd be a service at church, and then a party in the evening. So I think the Derby one is very much for that sort of event.
Yeah.
A special event, but obviously there must have been other instruments. It wouldn't have just been the flute book.
What I find interesting about the other instruments that may or may not have been accompanying the fiddle, we know the Manx love their fiddle. We know they love to sing. I'd imagine something like a viola or a cello may be included, but they're quite expensive instruments for around here at the time. But there must have been some people with experience with them.
They would make them. When you think there are a lot of violins which were made in the island, some of them actually go for quite a lot of money when they come up for sale in England. So they were good instruments, they were well made. But of course the trouble is that a lot of this music died out because what had happened, originally in the Anglican Church, they would have a band. This is known as the West Gallery Band, and they would consist of a flute, maybe a violin, a clarinet, a cello, whatever instruments happened. They called it clarinet, not a clarinet. It was an early form of clarinet. But they would be there for the hymns. This was just on special occasions, not every week. But then during the sermon, they would troop out to the nearest pub and then come back again to play the last hymn. So this was not very popular. So they were driven out. And of course, they either went to the Methodist church or they went into the nearest pub and played there, which is what they did in Sheffield. They went to the nearest pub, and that tradition still exists now. And I've been there to experience it at Christmas, and it's wonderful.
Interesting. And of course, all through the 20th century, late 1800s into the 20th century, brass bands of the Isle of Man are just prevalent. There's one in every parish street corner, isn't there? And I see historically as well in the Isle of Man, there's not really much accordion or concertina that came into our culture at all, which is interesting 'cause being a seafaring nation, considering the Dutch brought the concertinas to South America, the French brought their piano accordions into Louisiana, and still really prevalent, but it's something that's not really come into our music very much.
Maybe that ties up with the fiddle music again, because most ships had a fiddler on board.
Yeah.
So that could be part of the tradition.
Part of the shantyman fiddlers. Yeah. So, that's interesting. I think also another interesting thing about whistles, flutes, brass instruments, concertinas, is that they are a fixed pitch, whereas strings, they can tune up really quickly, even if you've had a little too much light ale on a Saturday night before your parish meeting in the morning. But they're easy to tune, which I find very interesting about American folk music. It's predominantly stringed instruments.
And that brings up another topic as well, because the Norwegians do different tunings on violins. I wonder if the Manx did originally. I've not come across it yet, but I'll see if I can find any references.
So on emigres, they would have been quite versed with hymns and psalms, West Gallery music, maybe sort of Cayleys and Eel Verries. I think they would have experienced, no matter what their age, they would have experienced a good deal of music as they're going across the Atlantic
They
to
would
their
have
new
known
world.
their dance tunes, the hymns you've mentioned, dance tunes, ballads, songs. And I wonder what they sang on their way over, because if they were on a ship for 3 months, which very often they were, small boat, we call it a ship, 500, 600 tons, he'd be tossed around. We don't know how many didn't get there either, that's the other thing.
That's interesting.
But, they would have been telling stories to each other, they would have no doubt had arguments. But I think music would have been very important on that sort of angle, and just to while away the time.
Yeah, and unity, the safety in numbers. If you've just tuned in, you're listening to Island Life, A New World, Old Ways with David Kinley. And in this episode, I'm talking to Fenella Bazin about the Manx and their music. What evidence do we have of any Manx music continuing in the United States of America? It's very few and far between, isn't it?
I've not come across very much. The only ones that are regularly sung to this day, of course, is Ellen Vannon and the National Anthem. Both of which, well, certainly Ellen Vannon, written by a woman from Yorkshire, Eliza Craven Green. Music by a man called Townsend. We don't know what his initial was because it keeps changing, whichever the publication is, from Manchester. So they were immigrants here, and then, certainly Eliza was. She spent part of her life here and then went back to Yorkshire. And of course, Gill, who we've mentioned that, Mulcairn, and made it into the national anthem. He wasn't born, he was born in Sicily. And he didn't really live here. He was at school in King William's. And then he would visit the island. And he went round collecting songs in the late 19th century. And he must have been quite a daunting figure, because he wore a top hat quite often. And he was a man from across. I wonder how selective they were. I think Dr. Clegg was very different.
I was just about to mention Dr. Clegg, a huge collection.
A huge collection. And of course, he was Manx and he knew people. He went into their homes. He was the doctor. So he had a very different outlook from Gill.
They seem to be quite prolific, if anything, for such a small island, because there's only about 50,000 people here at that time when they're recording it. And it was down to, 1715, 14,500 people living on the Isle of Man.
And when you think, again, back to Mullagheren, which you can't get away from, George Borrow came over and he visited the farm next to us, Close Taggart, which you mentioned you drove past. And he visited there because the family there were called Mullagheren and the song was supposed to have originated there. That was his theory anyway. But, that was such an important element. It goes right through every strain of Manx music.
Our communities, particularly in Ohio, there'll be other people who know better to answer this question, but whether they were having their own Eel Verries or Cayleys, we don't really know. There's some letter writing going on about an event that may have happened, but whether they were seasonal events like what their culture was, and whether they're maintaining seasonal events, I really don't know.
Did they have time? We do have one manuscript which was originated in North America by a Manxman called George Quiggin in the 1850s. It came back to the island, as I think George Quiggin did. And it's a very strange manuscript. It's mainly hymns and then a few ballads, very, very strange ballads, some of them. But it's the handwriting which is very odd. It's not the standard music notation, which would have 5 lines for the right hand, 5 lines for the left hand, 5 lines for the right hand, 4 lines for the left hand, and 2 lines in between the 2 staves. Most of the stems on the notes are the wrong way round, so it looks very odd. And it is a style that was known in the early 19th century in North America. There's only one tune in there which is specifically Manx, and that's called the Island Minstrel, which he writes as Manx original O Manan Veen Machierveg Hidden. And it goes on, it's got Manx text, and the English is translated from it, it's clear, because the English is not, it's a bit clumsy, a bit clunky. That's the only one.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating. And there's a Manxman writing down a Manx song in Manx, but with an American style of writing the staves. He's obviously quite learned, I'd say.
It sounds as if he learned how to write his music in North America, not on the island.
Yeah.
So that in itself is interesting. And some of it's very difficult to read because he's embellished it a lot. He's obviously having fun. I think probably playing at the sort of events we've been talking about, like the Ilveras, because he's got hymns in there, hymn tunes, but also these ballads with strange titles, some of them. They have, something called The Wanderer. And he's wandered over deserts and he wants to be home again. He's got all sorts of titles which... there is a better land, that's one of the hymns. Thy will be done. Some of them are familiar. Holy Night, Peaceful Night, which is an American version, I think, not Silent Night. And then I've tried to see if he's got all of these hymns and songs from one source, but I've tried to track it down, but from a huge variety of sources, some of them English. But some of the songs, the echo, it starts, my mournful days are spent unknown. Very Victorian, when you think about it. This is... then there's another one, I love these hills and valleys. That's a song called My Native Home. And then the distant hills, I see the distant hills fading away. It's that sort of thing. He's obviously, I think, homesick, but it strikes me as the sort of thing that would be played at an Ailvery.
I'd like to think they did have Eel Verries and gallery singing. Because there is the Laxey Methodist Church in Ohio, and you see the name of the subscribers and the builders, and it's 4 Manxmen, 4 Manx surnames. So I'd imagine there's something pretty Manx going on there.
And there's Clegg Park.
Park, of course.
And the number of people I've met from Cleveland who know Clegg Park and grew up near there. But there are a big group, 190 people, chartered a ship from Ramsey to sail across the Atlantic, 190 of them from Belaf, Derby, Andros, and I think maybe Bride as well. And they set off, and their aim was not Cleveland, but Buffalo.
I have relations there. And it's my grandfather's sister married a GI and moved in there.
Yeah, how interesting. And of course, how did they pay for it? That's the big question, because farm labourers were going. It could cost anything from £3.50 or £3.10 in those days, £5 for a single ticket across the Atlantic, and that's only to take you as far as New York or the East Coast. And if it was the children, if you had a wife, 2 or 3 children, you're getting close to your annual income of sort of £18-20 a year. Where did they get the money from? And Frank Cowan
of indenturement?
Frank Cowan reckons it was the Mormons. And they paid for them to go, and then people were asked if they would repay it when they could. So that's an interesting theory.
As opposed to being indentured, being paid when you can is not quite the same. So that's a bit more generous. That's interesting. That's a different sort of status of emigre of what a lot of people think of emigres to America are. We'd like to think there was eel ferries going on in Cleveland.
It's opened up a whole new field of research, which I'm hoping to follow. I'm very grateful to you for suggesting it.
But as we get into the late Victorian period, of course, the Isle of Man's booming with tourism, etc. And I find what a great irony of the music that they would be listening to in the Isle of Man would be from across the Atlantic, minstrel music, banjos, theatre entertainments. So that emigration has been going on for a few centuries by this point. We get to the Victorian period, and there's music coming over from America to the Isle of Man. Minstrel music, most extraordinary.
And I think it's, yes, and there's a lot of influence coming, and it's new, it's exciting. You could understand the people who'd moved to America being excited by that music too.
I think one of the things we've sort of touched upon is how much involvement the Manx made to the development of music in the United States. But let's face it, we're such a small percentage of such a huge story that I don't think we made much of an impact, particularly in my interest, which was Appalachian mountain music, because they didn't really settle there. They did go through the pass to get to East Kansas and up to Ohio, but the bulk of them were in the 1800s, and they came down through the Erie Canal. So there's not really much evidence that we really contributed to much banjo playing or dulcimer playing at all. I'd like to think there is, but we romanticise on that.
I think so, yes.
I do wonder if the Manx Americans, how long they kept their seasonal songs going together, because our seasonal songs are really strong. I don't know really how old Hop Tune is, but it's an iconic tune. Every child still in the early 20th century here knows that song. I just wonder just how much those sort of seasonal songs actually travelled. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's a lot of conjecture.
And of course, seasons are different once they got to the States.
They were busy. As soon as the day they arrived, they became busy people. And they had to be involved and evolve in their new environment.
And I think what made them different from, say, the Scots, the clearances, or the Irish fleeing the famine, was that a lot of the Manx were bilingual. Yes. They had English already. They hit the ground running. They didn't have to learn a new language. So that was another advantage, which suggests that they were going into that sort of community which spoke English.
Yeah.
So who knows? I'm just hoping that we'll be able to find out more about this, because I think it's a very interesting topic that you opened up.
Thank you. So if any of our American friends are listening, do tell us if you're having an eel ferry coming up this Christmas, or what do you do on Hop Tune, and etc. Do you know anything about Beltane crush kerns? Are you doing that over in the States these days, guys? So let us know. So we've got our Manx emigre. We can conclude that they would have been quite exposed to a number of occasions and hymns and fiddle playing and celebrations and mournings, of course, with funerals, etc. And they'll be quite wise to our musical culture as they went across the Atlantic. But we don't know how much that actually stayed with them. But we can romanticise, can't we? Fenella, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's been a great pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Lots of new ideas.
Lots of new ideas. God almighty. You've been listening to Island Life, A New World, Old Ways. You can listen back to this programme by subscribing to Manx Radio podcasts using your usual podcast provider. Garamaiad, Emu.